Happy Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on where you are in the world. Hope everybody had a great week, and I'm loaded with more questions. So, uh, if you've been listening, you know I've got this thing about volume, and it's important, but for the average surfer, it's really just a base reference. It's not what you get on the so-called volume checkers is not gospel. It's just, it gives you, what you should do is you should look at the volume. And this question here says, volume is today a major thing. What increments should a regular guy do? Half a liter or 1 liter? I would definitely say no to half a liter. As I've pointed out many times, half a liter is a coffee cup, roughly. A liter, yes, and depending on how the volume thing is a percentage of your body weight. You convert your body weight to kilograms, and you take roughly a third of your body weight, and but the bigger the board is, that's going to mean more volume. Like a short board might be a liter. In a 7-foot board it might be 2 liters. An 8-foot board it might be 3 liters. But the volume thing, once again, is just it's just one parameter of board design. You wouldn't believe how many customers I get that are adamant about a half a liter. And they go, well, what if I add a half an inch? If you add a half an inch, it adds about 3/10 or 2/10 of a liter. Probably, there's so many different aspects to the design of the surfboard, and I could spend hours and hours talking about it. I think one of the most commonly overlooked design aspects is the overall width of the board, and then specific widths like the tail. Like I've forever have kept records of the width of a tail, an inch up, 6 inches up, 12 inches up, 18 inches up. And I get somebody squabbling with me over a third of a liter, but they haven't made a single comment about the width, much less the rocker, the thickness, the balance of the thickness, and the balance of the template, much less the rails. There's just the common milk toast rail out these days with a kind of a higher apex and a rounder rail. And if you let me just design what I want, I would probably have a little bit lower apex than most of my rails. And but yeah, back to the volume question. It's just, please don't get too hung up on it. Unless you're an advanced surfer and you're a lighter surfer, a liter. A liter either way. 25.5 liters. You'll probably you might feel a half a liter, but then when you get up to like 30 liters, I've got pros that were adamant about 29.5, and then now they're at 30, and then their next board they want 31 or 32.
How do you ask them to do that?
Oh.
You're being covered by the comments.
Oh, but yeah, keep in mind that it's really a kind of a relative percentage thing. What tips do you have for what you give to people when ordering a board? I have advanced surfers that have been riding my boards for 20 or 30 years, and they email me and they go, if you're not too busy, can you make me another 6'2", just like the last one? I go, no problem. And then I get guys that are beginners that send me a 5-page introduction letter telling me about how they surf, where they surf, what they've ridden, and it turns out that they, there's nothing wrong with it. It depends on your situation, but they only get to surf a few times a year, but they're internet educated. Um, what advice would I give, or what tips? Uh, I would tend to be. I would say, please be a little bit more flexible. I had a guy up in Newport. He was an older guy, and he had a top brand board, and he wanted me to copy it, and Pedro measured it up for me. He took a tail template, and we built the board. And I thought it came out insane, but he got the board, and he was livid. I go, what's the problem? He goes, the tail template's off. And I go, what do you mean it's off? He goes, it's not the same one I wanted. I go, we took a tail template, and he didn't mention that there was more rocker or more concave or less concave, or, anything like that. He was like, the tail template's off. I said, please try the board. I have tried, in my lifetime, I've tried so many different.
Sorry, I need to. That is asking me to grab.
Oh,
Is it being covered by the?
Here, just take the thing away, I guess.
By the.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, trust your shaper. Especially if you choose an experienced shaper. I mean, there's some young shapers that are pretty good, but as time goes by, shapers get more experienced, and some shapers choose to broaden their scope. Others kind of are fixated on one thing. But after you've decided to go with a particular brand, you should trust the shaper. You should give them some leeway, some creative juices. And I get people that I had a person yesterday that wanted to order a T-Dort, and we actually, I don't think we have it anymore on our list of boards. But I said, look, I can recreate the T-Dort. You just tell me, you give me a rough idea of what you want, and I can recreate it. I can combine a Piranha and a T-Dort. I can do a triple wing Neil Diamond, but that's the beauty of custom shaping is you can design and you can have boards built, but on the flip side, listen to your shaper. I had another guy, Texas, a lot of good surfers in Texas, and he's emailed me a long email, and so I sent him a design and I thought would be good for him, and he sent me another long email, and he said, can we talk? And so, yeah, sure. The next day I gave him a call, and he talked my ear off for 45 minutes, and I thought we agreed on a board, and so I programmed it, and I sent it to him for approval, and he goes, well, we need to talk again. And I emailed him back a very polite email that's, look, we've spent quite a bit of time on this. You have to, if I was a lawyer, your bill would be thousands of dollars. But you have to respect the shaper's time as well when you're ordering a board. Kind of figure it out and get to know, all the different designs are available and figure it out. But this guy, he said, well, I need to talk again. I sent him. Could you go get my power cord next to the bed? My power cord.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks. So I sent him a very polite email. And I said, look, Clay, I really want to make you what's best for you. I've been listening. I sent you several designs, but please, have some respect for my time. And, we're going on 3 or 4 hours of talking. And the next day I get an email back. He says, cancel my order. And I'm going, oh. So I guess I'm kind of mumbling on, but, I usually communicate through email. Time to time I'll get on the phone with somebody, but, that's another tip when you're ordering a board. Most shapers, want to communicate with you one way or the other. If you're a busy shaper, preferably email, but, have a little bit of respect for the shaper's time, because hand shaping a short board takes, I don't know, an hour and a half, depending on how complicated the board is. And, you spend maybe 20 minutes or half an hour talking with a customer, either via email or on the phone. And there's about that's about a 2-hour time commitment to the board. But when somebody starts taking 3, 4, 5 hours of your time, and they go back and forth, and I had another customer the other day that I'd sent him about 5 different designs, and he goes, well, I think I like your first design the most. I said, all right, we'll go with the first design. But enough of that. What are the basics for rocker? That is a very, 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 very good question. Back in the old days, the boards were basically planks, 'cause that's what people thought they needed: big, giant, long, wide, flat boards. And as time went by, the boards started getting smaller, narrower, more curve in the outline, and more curve in the bottom. And it was really, I think, in '67 when boards started to get shorter. And and I've said this before, April '68, I was tripping, because in the magazines there were ads for longboards from the big companies, and then there were ads from a few other big companies, and some smaller companies that could afford to advertise on shortboards. This 6.8, 7.2s, and the other guys are still trying to peddle 9.6s. And that's really when people really started experimenting with rocker, and not so much tail rocker, but nose rocker. And you can see, if you have access somehow to these old magazines, maybe online, you can see how radical some of the designs were. Reno Abalera did a collaboration with GNS in the late '60s, a board called the Disc, which basically looked like a snow ski. It had such exaggerated nose rocker. I personally don't know how it rode, and I never saw anybody ride one except Reno. But as time marched on into the mid '70s and later in the '70s, tail rockers started to become more closely looked at, and people started experimenting with more and more tail rocker. And fast forward into the '80s, I started using more tail rocker. I was a little bit hesitant on the entry rocker, just because I thought that it was starting to become excessive. And then in the late '80s, when Kelly, I think I'm guessing at the dimensions, but the board was like 6'2" and 18 and quarter inches wide and 2¼ inches thick. But it had like 6 inches of nose rocker and 2½ inches of 2 5/8 inches tail rocker, and it looked like a banana. But Kelly is such a freak that he won contests. He won a lot of contests, and everybody followed the leader. And I remember making a board for Taylor Knox that was, Taylor's a pretty solid guy. He's 175, 80 pounds, I think. And he started, glomming onto Kelly's ideas, and he had me make a board 17 3/4 inches wide, but it also had banana rocker, and he rode it in the OP contest. And he looked great when he was right in the pocket. The board looked super loose and free, but the minute he came out of the pocket, the board bogged. And so, fast forward in the 2000s, Pat O'Connell asked me to recreate a board that I made him for 5 Summer Stories. And I remember it had a lot of rocker, but I went back and I looked at it. It was like a 5'9", and it had 5 3/4 inches of nose rocker and 2½ inches of tail rocker. I called him up and I said, Pat, I can duplicate this board. I can special order a blank with all the extra rocker glued up, or I can modify it slightly more towards modern standards. And so we backed the rocker down a little bit. But I'd say these days, the rocker on the boards is, especially in the era of the machines, doesn't fluctuate. The tail doesn't fluctuate much. I mean, if you look at the average 6.0 or 6.2, I would bet that 90% of them, 2 1/8, maybe give or take 1/8 of an inch or 3/16. And the nose rocker varies a little bit more from shaper to shaper. And so what rocker does basically is it is designed to fit the curve of the wave or the path that you want to take on the wave. More rockers, more curve. There's always a trade-off on a design aspect. It'll have theoretically less drive, but tighter arcs. And the flatter the rocker gets, it'll have more drive. It'll have longer arcs, and that's what fishes are all about. The performance shortboards are the ones that have the tighter arcs, more rocker, and the type of boards the guys compete on. And then there's everything in between, which, when I say a fish, a 5'6" fish might have 1 3/4 inch tail rocker, and a 5'6" shortboard might have maybe an extra 1/8 of an inch tail rocker or 3/16, but the nose rocker is a huge difference. So when you're custom ordering a board, whether it's me or anybody else, maybe I'm giving you guys too much ammunition, but you can look at our boards online. You can look at a lot of boards online, and most people use the word, a lot or mellow or moderate, and those are kind of vague terms. But I would encourage you to look at other components on a surfboard. Volume, you really don't know. There's probably a 5% variance on what the machine cuts and what the finished product has. And that's a lot more than a half a liter of volume. And then there's the finish work. It's how much sanding the shaper does and how much foam he takes off. I swear a third of a liter is like just sanding an extra couple of strokes all over the whole board, and that'll take off a third of a liter. If you're serious about your surfing and you're surfing a lot and you're trying lots of boards, which I encourage everybody to do, don't focus so much on literage. it's a consideration. But somebody asked me, well, geez, I've never ridden a board. I ride it usually 19 and an eighth, 19 and a quarter, but I've never ridden a board under 19 because he only weighed 140 pounds or something like that. So I programmed a board like 18 and 3/4 for him. And, in terms of volume, it's really not that much less volume, but in terms of surface area and planing area and the distance from rail to rail and the quickness time from, rolling from rail to rail or turning from rail to rail is much quicker. The board's much more sensitive. And, that's another issue that you should, not issue, but that's another factor that you should take in. So trying to keep it under 4 hours, but, having questions about all of those things, it might be difficult. But in all seriousness, somebody that's, got 500 or 1,000 boards under their belt can arguably make a good board for, almost everybody, because the skill level is like a pyramid, and at the bottom, like I was at one time, surfers are beginners, and then beginner intermediates, and then as you get better and better, the number of surfers that are at your skill level starts to diminish. But most of the better surfers that have been around for a while and tried a lot of boards have a much better idea, besides volume, of what they want on their boards. Length versus width. What is the best direction? A wider board or a longer board? It's really a broad scope question. I think if you're a beginner, length and width are going to be your friends. As you advance, it's all in how you want to surf. There's some great surfers that ride 9-foot boards that are 23 inches wide and 3 inches thick. Great surfers. The great surfers that ride boards that are 18 inches wide and 2 1/8 thick and are 5'10". So that's really more of a philosophical question. And I encourage people to, over time, get a quiver going. Just don't be a one board at a guy time. You get your go-to board when you're beginning, and then, probably that board's big enough to keep for the really small days as you advance. And then as you advance, you get a more high-performance board if that's the direction you want to go. And then the next board you should probably get is a step-up board, especially if you're interested in riding bigger waves. And start to build your quiver, and if you can afford it, you hang on to the good ones and ride them from time to time.
You want to check some online? Some online questions?
Fin cant preference.
For a quad.
For a quad shortboard. The front, what is the fin cant preference for a quad shortboard? And the front fins, I usually have roughly the same angle. It's if you're measuring the flat of a board, if you create a flat surface, because most boards these days don't have flat surfaces, but if you create an imaginary flat surface, the fin will be canted out about 7/8 of an inch from the trailing bottom point to the trailing top point, and the rear fins are about half as much. Their front fins 4.5 inches on average, and the rear fins are 4, give or take a little bit on average. And they're a little bit closer in from the rail, that's my theory. And they're a little bit straighter up and down, but they're pointed at the same point that the main fins are. But years and years ago, I was working with Wayne Lynch, and I said, "Well, what are your thoughts on fin cant?" And Wayne was one of my very first heroes. As soon as this board started getting shorter, there's this crazy footage of this 16-year-old in a movie called Evolution, 16, 17-year-old from Victoria, Australia, that who was surfing was mind blowing. But years later, I got the opportunity to work with him for a while, and I asked him, and he kind of looked at me straight in the eye, and he goes, "Well, 7/8 of an inch," and that's the net difference. I failed on that earlier, but that's the difference between the trailing tips of the two fins and the trailing base point on the two fins. So slightly less than half an inch. But yeah, he looked at me straight, and he goes, 7/8 of an inch. I go, oh, okay. But the straighter up and down the fin is the thinking is it's going to have more drive, and the more canted out the fin is, the easier it will roll from rail to rail, but it will have less drive. And boards, some of the twin fins in the late 70s, and certainly with some of the early tri-fins, some of the fins were really canted out, and you could see the guys weren't getting the distance out of the turns, and they were tightening up their arcs, but they weren't making a lot of waves they could have made. So that's how the cant affects performance in basic terms, and I think once again most shapers are kind of on the same page with very slight variations. The same thing with templates too. There's so many surfer or shaper model templates out there, and these days most of them are pretty good, but they're all pretty similar. And there's the fin cant, there's the area, there's the rake, there's the flex. There's a whole book that could be written about fins. I don't know if they still have it, but Surfline, I did a series of design articles for them a few years ago, and one of them was on fins. And I wrote about an 8-page article on all those different aspects I just mentioned. Did you change something on the SD model after Dane Reynolds used it in Stab in the Dark? Not really. It's got one of the deeper single concaves that we offer, close to 0.3 inches. And I've talked about this before. I consider shallow 0.1, whether it's a convex or a concave, and intermediate 0.2, and deep, anything over about 0.25 or 0.28. But I didn't really change much. Dane, I think he kind of liked the board because he surfed really well on it. I mean, he had one of the stronger segments on my board, and he was looking at it and he was kind of trying to figure out something to say about it. He goes, "Well, the tail template's kind of funky." So, I looked at it, and it was a little bit more of a rounded squash than a squash tail. In hindsight, I think I don't know what his thoughts are these days on tails, but at that time he was riding a lot of pretty wide tail block square tails. But no, the rocker and the concave in the bottom and the template proportions are all the same. I may have taken a slight bit of the hip wing. I might have mellowed it out a touch, and I might have made the tail a little bit more squashy. But then I get people that ask me for round tail SDs, and they look cool. So once again, that's the beauty of a custom. Somebody, you go on a website and say, I like the look of the SD, but I really like the feel of a round tail. And I go, no problem. It takes me 2 minutes. Yeah, it's still pretty much the same. And that goes back to the Yes Thanks, which is, I don't know, is it 15 years old now, Pedro?
No, it's about that, yeah.
The Yes Thanks is pretty much the same bottom as the SD. It's just got, the Yes Thanks got a little bit narrower nose, wide point back, just a fraction. But if you look at the profiles of the boards, the SD has a touch more nose rocker, but the SD is still, the Yes Thanks is still a legitimate performance shortboard. Favorite planer? Well, once upon a time there was draw knives, and they poo-pooed electric planers. The real craftsmen. Oh, those things. They use draw knives, two-handled woodworking tools. When I first started shaping in I can't even remember anymore, but it's like I shaped my first board in the fall of '69. The electric Skill 100s were the go-to planer. And there's all kinds of planers. There's bigger, heavier, more powerful planers. There's lighter planers for hobbyists. And planers are designed for planing wood. And then surfers got a hold of them and started shaping surfboards with them. But Skill stopped making their planers 25 years ago, maybe? I'm guessing 25, 30 years ago. And I freaked out. I had one backup planer, and you could still buy parts. But then I started hoarding planers. I have 12, 15 Skill planers. And they came in a variety of amperage, and the higher the amps, the more powerful the motor, and those were the ones that I preferred. I've got at least a dozen Skill planers. Clark Foam, realized that once Skill stopped making the planers, that somebody had to step up and do something about the planers for surfboards. So Hitachi made a planer. It was lighter but higher RPM planer, and some shapers were already using it, and some shapers were modifying it. So what Clark Foam did is they questioned a bunch of shapers and got suggestions on what to do with the planer. And Clark Foam actually sold, it was a Hitachi. It was a plastic body, which is, I don't know, I kind of like the aluminum bodies than the Skill planers, but plastic body. So it was lighter, it was easier on the shaper's back. It, had a faster RPM, so it didn't tear as less. And that, that probably, I think, became the most popular planer after the Skill. And, that's kind of a go-to planer these days. So, but yeah, I've got a lot of great memories about hoarding my skills. I went out an hour inland once. So the guy was advertising a planer, and he's like an old ex-farmer dude. And he goes, I have no idea what this thing's worth. I didn't want to tell him it was priceless, but I paid him, I don't know, $300 for the thing, which is, you knew a Skill planer was, back in the day, it was maybe $120 or something like that. But now, people are getting over $1,000 for them. Another second here. Um, what do wings on the outline do? That's a good question. Um, there's a few shapers in the 50s that experimented with bumps in the outline. And that was good thinking, especially for those bigger, heavier boards, because what it does is it breaks up the outline curve, and it gives you a pivot point, in basic words. And Velzy, I think, did one called the bump. But wings, I think wings really started to become popular in the very early 70s, and I think by then a lot of shapers were experimenting with them. But one that I can really remember is Terry Fitzgerald. But wings have become a very commonplace design feature, and I mean, my personal thought on wings are with a tri-fin. I don't know. I kind of prefer a bump, a little bump in the a little break in the outline, and I've experimented with moving them up and down the board, and if you move them up too far, and you have too much of a break, the board really doesn't want to commit to a line. It kind of tries to set a rail, but it's hard because there's too much break in the outline. Probably, one of the most important designs to me was the Piranha, and I got to give a shout out to Timmy Patterson, who was making Chris Ward's boards at the time, 20 years ago, whatever. And I was still going over to Hawaii every winter and I stopped judging, but I was shaping every winter, and I was sitting on the beach. It was a 4-foot day at Backdoor, and Chris Ward was out. He looked like he was riding almost like a fish, but he was lighting the place up. And I watched, and when he came in, I go, "Hey, can I check out your board?" And he goes, "Sure." And it was kind of a fuller outline, maybe another inch on the nose, and a kind of a fuller tail, but it had 3 sets of wings and a swallowtail. I just go, wow. And back, around 1970, give or take a couple of years, Michael Peterson, he's experimenting a lot with wings. As I said, probably a lot of shapers were, but Michael Peterson, I remember seeing a photo of him with 6 sets of wings or something. I don't think it really caught on. It didn't catch on. It's too freaking hard to build. But I don't know. Wings are, for twin fins, I think they're super critical. Because the way I design a twin fin is I have the curve through the middle, and as it runs in towards the wing, I have it actually straighten out a little bit as it comes into the wing. And my thinking is for a little bit more drive, and then I have an angular wing, roughly 1/2 inch, and then the line breaks, but not too much. I see a lot of shapers to this day that, I don't even know if you can call them twin fins because they all have 3 boxes, but to me a twin fin's got 2 fins and that's it. But the hard wing is lined up with pretty much the rear of the fin, and short boards, I place my fins at 8.5, 9 inches, and 1.5 inches in from the rail, 1 3/8, and then there's a wing, a hard wing, which lines up with the rear of the fin, and then there's a break, but it's not a noticeable. It's still kind of keeps with the line of the main template. And then I usually have a concave that runs out through that wing. And that's all of those things are designed to give the board, you put it over a rail and it holds. And then when you start to come out of your turn, it releases off the wing and your line breaks and you come up the face quicker or cut back. You have a noticeable break point in your turns, and too big of a wing. Once again, design is about happy mediums. It's like, well, what if you had a 2-inch big wing? And I go, well, imagine you'd probably. You really wouldn't feel like there was a tail on the board behind the wing. If you had too much of a break, or if you didn't have enough of a break, you really wouldn't feel it at all. So that's design work is finding a balance. What is the function of grab rails? My first experience with grab rails is when we started. Well, I take that back. We had done them in the '90s, and we had experimented with glass rope rovings along the rails, and we'd create dents and put the rovings in, and that would help. It would help the boards keep from breaking. But that was a little bit different than the grab rails. The grab rails, Stretch. I'm not sure if he's the pioneer, but he's been a big advocate of them, and I think that I get guys ordering them because it helps them duck dive. It helps them push up on the board. On a short board, it will arguably stiffen up the board a little bit, like a corrugated tin roof. If you have a flat tin roof, it'll be all floppy and everything. But if you have the tin roofs with ridges on it, it's much sturdier, and so that's its strength. It's helps some people duck dive and push up, and we do a few stringless boards, and I tend to put more rail grabs on those boards than I do boards with the heavier the stringer, the stiffer the board's going to be. And I have a couple of Jamie Sterling, Garrett McNamara, a couple of guys that are all about grab rails, especially Jamie, and JoJo's been experimenting with some lately, and that's on their big guns, because those things are 3 3/4 inches thick, sometimes as much as 4 or 4 1/4 thick, and it's just hard to get your hands around the rails. And it's not really so much for strength on the big boards, because they usually are glassed a lot heavier, have a much bigger wood down the center. But the guns, a lot of the, not a lot, but quite a few of the guns get them. What else have we got?
This is a question from a guy online.
Talk about how low apex down rails on a flat deck work to gain volume, but still provide a high performance rail. First off, the apex is the widest point of the board, and that is usually, depending on the shape, between 0.55, 0.65, 0.75, maybe as much as 0.8 or 0.9. The distance that apex is up from the bottom of the rail. When in the early '80s, when I started making tri-fins, in the '70s, I had fairly low apex rails, and I had pretty full rails, but not as angular as they made them later. But the decks were pretty flat, and the rails were pretty full, and the apex was lower, and they work great. The lower apex rails set quicker. you have to be careful about how much volume you have after the apex and coming up into the deck. If you have too much volume, you'll have a harder time setting the rail. The board will be less sensitive, and if you take too much out, the board will overcommit, because you have, that's the thing with a convex deck is, and you have a rounded rail, you can drive the rail pretty darn deep in the water and bring it out. But with a lower apex rail and an angular rail, and it's a good question about the volume, because in all of our flat deck models, I generally go about 0.2, almost a quarter of an inch thinner to get the same volume. And I get some Japanese customers occasionally that are interested in a flat deck board, and they want to order them, 2.35 or 2.4 thick, like they would their normal short board. And this is not Japanese; it's customers. But I have to remind them that if they do normally ride like 2 3/8, 2 7/16, that they're probably going to need to get a board roughly a quarter inch thinner on the flat deck boards. So yeah, they have more volume at the top, they have less in the middle, and they have a lower apex. And if the rail's designed right, you'll be surprised, because when you tip the board over, it will engage a lot quicker than a typical round rail crown deck setup, and it will engage. And then when you start to release your turn, it will disengage, or it'll come out of the water quicker. I don't know. I'm a big advocate of them, but and like I said, if they're made right, the ride's beautiful. They get up in water and they plane quicker too. The lower the apex. Somebody said asked me once, they go, well, what about Morris Cole's designs with the hard edge all the way around the board? The edges vary. Usually they're a little bit firmer in the nose. The apex gets to its highest point around the wide point, or just ahead of the wide point, and then it tails off, and then the last 18 inches, there's hardly, at least on my boards, there's hardly any tuck. And Josh Curry used to say, yeah, I want my edge to start, 4 fingers in front of the front fin, and Wade a little touch further back, and he's real particular about how tucked under the edge is. But that's good, because you're focusing on the business end of the surfboard. The last third of this. If you have to assign importance to, what's the most important part of a board, and I think it's what I call the business end, and that's behind the wide point. What else? What's the fun?
We've only got 8 minutes.
Yeah, I only have a couple minutes left, so I'm trying to. What are the basic for fins? What to try? What fins to change the board? Guidance for regular civilians. That is actually a very good question. Fins. Once upon a time we all had glass-ons, and then in the late 70s, mid to late 70s, G&S came out with a removable fin for all the twin fins they were making, and and then FCS came along, and when FCS came along, that really changed. That really changed the landscape on fins, and the first FCF fins were shitty. I don't know how else to put it, but they're shitty, and none of the pros rode them because they were shitty. The problem was, it wasn't so much the templates, the foils were, but it was the material they're made of. They're made out of a plastic, and I call it the memory in the fin, but it's how quick the fin goes back to its original state. And I was obsessed with fins my whole life. Since I started surfing and shaping. I mentioned I used to hang out with Skip a little bit. He used to have a crate in the back of his car and truck or whatever of 10, 15 different fins. And I go, wow. And he goes, yeah, everyone makes the board ride different. And there's a lot of truth to that. And if you can imagine having 3 or 4 fins, it really makes a difference. But, FCS, all the pro surfers kept getting glass-ons, and there was a interesting interview with it was Dan in Surfers. It was the interview the movie was called Surfers, and there was they interviewed all the surfers about fins, different aspects of the boards and different aspects about surfing, and so they asked them about fins, and about 10 of them always said, well, glass-ons, because they're so much better. And I'm not sure, but I think it was Dane Reynolds. He was kind of new on the scene, and they asked him, and he thinks about it, and he says, oh, I like glass-ons, but heck, Kelly Slater rides FCS plastic. Kelly rides FCS, so it must be good. But FCS did come along. After Futures came onto the scene and started experimenting with a lot better molding materials, a lot more sophisticated molding. And I think FCS saw the writing on the wall, too. They were already experimenting with it. So they started doing, carbon and high density foam and different placements of carbon and really good foils and the flex patterns are pretty good. Some of the fin designs have a softer flex pattern and some have a stiffer flex pattern. And that, one of my problems with the plastic fins is they had a very slow rebound. Whereas you have a fin that's made out of G10 or carbon and fiberglass, it's going to have a very quick rebound. You put pressure on it, and as you ease up, it springs, but it is much quicker and more alive. And then that's the material that fins are made out of. It's and I'll pick up on this next time, but there's the overall area of the fin. And I tell, I almost made a T-shirt once that said, friends don't let friends ride plastic fins. If they come with a surfboard when you get the surfboard, take them, set them aside, so if you sell the surfboard, you can sell the fins with the board or include the fins. But I think it's an essential part of any kind of performance board is a composite fin. And next time I'll get into the rake, the area, thickness, the foil. There's so much to cover. But anyways, all of you tuning in, have a great week, and we might get Jojo here next Tuesday. I don't know. But anyways, thanks for tuning in and take care.